Welcome back, everyone. Today we're making a mini backpack. And this bag measures in at 8.5 by 6.5 with a 4.5-inch depth, making it a perfect size for your phone, keys, wallet, and more. And this backpack is on the easier side to make, so if you are new to sewing, you should have no problem following the easy step-by-step tutorial. With all that being said, don't forget to grab the PDF pattern and let's get started. Getting started with supplies, you need a half yard for your main fabric, and I'm going to be using an upholstery fabric. This is on the harder side to use, so if you're new to sewing, I recommend using a canvas, denim, or twill. These fabrics are easy to work with and they're very durable. But like always, get creative with it and use whatever fabric that's really going to bring your design together. You'll need a half yard for your secondary fabric, and this is going to be for the lining layer. So I recommend using a lightweight fabric. I typically use a nylon, but for this project, I'm using a very lightweight cotton. And it's best to use a lighter weight because once you start stacking all these layers together, it can get pretty bulky. And at the end, when you put the bias tape on, it gets a little bit tricky. You'll need 2 zippers, one 14-inch and one 8-inch. You can pretty much use any style of zipper for this project. I'll be cutting mine from a zipper roll. It's a great way to go because you can get a precise cut and minimize the waste. You'll need 2 yards of 1-inch width webbing, and this is going to be used for the main straps. These are going to be adjustable straps. You can get away with less than 2 yards, but I recommend starting at 2 yards and trimming it back. In the hardware going along with that webbing, you'll need 2 strap adjusters and 2 D-rings. If you do choose to change the size of your webbing width, you're also going to want to change the width of your hardware. Lastly, you'll need your pattern. This pattern is available at properfitclothing.com. It's super easy to use. All you have to do is download it, print it off, tape it together, and you're ready to go. Before you tape the pattern together, the best thing to do is to cut off the top and one of the side edges. This is going to allow you to overlap the pages for a perfectly aligned pattern. Once you have all your supplies gathered and your pattern printed out, it's time to move into cutting.
And after taping your pattern together, it should look like this. Be sure to check your printer alignment for the best possible results. And from here, we're going to cut on the outside of the black line. Once you cut out all of the panels, you should end up with 2 front pocket top panels, 1 cut out of your secondary fabric and 1 cut out of your main fabric. 2 front pocket bottom panels, 1 cut out of your secondary fabric and 1 cut out of your main fabric. 2 front top panels, 1 cut out of your secondary fabric and 1 cut out of your main fabric. 3 front pocket bottom lining and inside divider panels, all cut out of your secondary fabric. 4 zipper side panels, 2 cut out of your secondary fabric and 2 cut out of your main fabric. 4 top zipper side panels, 2 cut out of your secondary fabric and 2 cut out of your main fabric. 2 bottom side panels, 1 cut out of your secondary fabric and 1 cut out of your main fabric. And lastly, you'll need 2 back main panels, 1 cut out of your secondary fabric and 1 cut out of your main fabric. Before we move on, there is one more panel. It's a front pocket zipper cut guide. You don't need to cut any fabric for this. We're just going to use it as a guide to get the precise zipper cut. But we'll get more into that once we start putting together the front pocket. Moving on to assembly, start by grabbing your top zipper side panels. Separate the secondary fabric from the main fabric, and we only need 2 to start, so you can place 2 off to the side and grab your zipper. Using the pattern, locate the zipper edge, and this is where we're going to place the zipper. Put the wrong side of the zipper to the right side of the secondary fabric and the right side of the main fabric to the right side of the zipper and stitch the edge at a 1/4-inch seam allowance. After finishing the stitch, we're going to flip the wrong sides together, lining up the top and side edges, and place a few pins so those layers don't shift around. Before we add a top stitch, we're going to grab our remaining set of top zipper side panels and do the exact same thing on the opposite side of the zipper. Place the wrong side of the zipper to the right side of the secondary fabric and the right side of the main fabric to the right side of the zipper, lining up the outside edges, and then we're going to stitch that zipper edge at a 1/4-inch seam allowance. Flip the wrong sides together, line up the secondary and the main fabric, add a few pins. When you have all those layers perfectly lined up, we're going to add a top stitch to both sides of the zipper. For the best results, I recommend using an edge presser foot. Double check both sides. If everything is looking good, we can slide this panel up and grab the bottom side panel. Separate the secondary fabric from the main fabric. Locate the side edges and place the zipper assembly with right sides together. Since the zipper assembly is shorter than the bottom side panels, we're going to place a few pins and then we're going to pull that bottom side panel back and line up the opposite side. Place a few pins to keep the layers from shifting around. With all the layers perfectly lined up, we're going to stitch both side edges at a 1/4-inch seam allowance. After stitching, flip the right sides out, separating the bottom panels from the zipper assembly. Move to the side seam of the zipper and we're going to pull those bottom panels away from the zipper and add a top stitch, and then we're going to repeat this on the opposite side. And it's best to take your time when it comes to sewing over the zipper. After finishing up the top stitch, double check all the layers in both sides, make sure everything is looking good. If everything checks out, that's going to complete this entire side panel, so for the moment we can place it off to the side and grab the front pocket bottom lining and inside divider panels. We only need 2 to start, so you can place 1 off to the side. Separate the remaining 2 and then place the right sides together, locate the top edge, and we're going to stitch that top edge at a 1/4-inch seam allowance. With the stitch complete, we're going to flip the wrong side sides together, lining up the bottom and outside edges. Place a few pins to prevent the layers from moving around, and then we're going to add a top stitch to the top edge. This assembly will become our inside divider, and for the moment it is complete, so we can place it off to the side and grab your back main panels. Separate the secondary fabric from the main fabric, and we're going to place the wrong sides together. Locate the webbing placement guides at the bottom of the pattern, and this is where we're going to place our D-ring loops. So we're going to cut two 3-inch strips of 1-inch webbing and feed those through our D-rings. Try to line it up as best as you can with the pattern, and we're going to do the same thing for the opposite side. Next, cut two 1-yard strips from the same webbing, and this can be adjusted later, so I recommend starting at 1 yard and trimming it back later. Both of these strips are going to be placed at the top of the panel, and feel free to reference the pattern. You'll want about a 1/2-inch gap in between the straps. And lastly, we're going to cut a 7-inch strip. This will be used for the loop holder at the top. Fold it in half and place it directly on top of the main straps. And you want all these straps hanging off the edge about a 1/4 inch to 1 inch. And from here, we're going to stitch the outside edge as close as we can to that edge. Keep in mind, this is just a placement stitch. And from here, we're going to grab two strap adjusters, and these are going to be the same width as our webbing. Grab the bottom end of one strap and feed the strap adjuster on about 1 to 1.5 feet. And you'll want that strap adjuster on the top side of the webbing. Move to the bottom and feed the webbing through the D-ring. Pull some slack through the center of the strap adjuster, just enough so you can feed the webbing end back through from the bottom side. Pull the webbing end out, remove the slack from the strap adjuster, and then we're going to roll that webbing end over and pin it down. This is the basic setup for the strap. We're going to do the same thing for the opposite side. Add your strap adjuster, feed it through the D-ring, feed it back through the strap adjuster, roll the end over, and pin it down. Once each side is ready, we're going to add a tack stitch to both of those rolled edges. I typically add the straps at the end because they get in the way once you start adding the side panels, but for this bag you kind of have to do it all at once, so I recommend sliding the strap adjuster all the way to the top, rolling those ends over, and rubber banding them down just to consolidate all that webbing and keep it out of the way so it's a little bit easier to finish it up. For the next step, we're going to flip it over to the secondary fabric side and grab our complete inside divider panel. And what we're going to do is place it directly on top of the back main panel, lining the bottom edge up, and we're going to stitch the sides and the bottom edge. You don't need to stitch all the way around, this is just a tack stitch to hold those panels into position. And quickly check to make sure all those layers are lined up. If everything is looking good, this is going to become our back assembly, and for the moment we can place it off to the side. And we can grab our zipper side panels and our front pocket zipper cut guide. Starting with the cut guide, we're going to cut our zipper to the exact length as the cut guide. Grab the zipper side panels, and we're going to place these on both sides of the zipper. Line up the secondary fabric on the wrong side of the zipper and the main fabric on the right side of the zipper. If your panels don't line up with the zipper, that's because zippers do come in different widths. And all you have to do is trim your panels to the width of your zipper. It's not going to throw off anything in future steps. But anyways, from here, we're going to stitch at a 1/4 inch seam allowance, locking down those side zipper panels. Fold the wrong sides together, lining up that outside edge, add a pin, and repeat this for the opposite side. Just like in previous steps, we're going to add a top stitch to both sides, going over the zipper, so take it slow. Quickly check both sides, make sure everything is nicely lined up, and then we're going to slide this assembly forward and grab our front pocket bottom panels. Separate the secondary fabric from the main fabric, locate the zipper edge at the top of the panel, and this is where we're going to place our zipper assembly. Place the right sides together, sandwiching the zipper in between both of the panels, and stitch the top edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Flip the wrong side together, lining up the side and bottom edge. Place a few pins, and before we add a top stitch, we're going to grab the front pocket top panel. So separate the layers, locate the zipper edge at the bottom of the panel, and we're going to place that on the opposite side of the zipper. We're going right sides together, sandwiching the zipper assembly in between both of the panels and stitching that top edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And you'll want that top assembly to line up with the bottom assembly. And from here, we're going to flip the wrong sides together, place a few pins. If everything is looking good and the outside edges are lined up, we're going to add a top stitch to both sides of the zipper. Try to make this stitch as neat as possible because it will be front and center on your bag. Next, we're going to grab one of the pattern pieces, locate the corner sew guides, and we're going to be sewing these corners together for both the secondary and the main fabric. Separate the layers, and starting with the secondary fabric, we're going to place the right sides together, lining up the outside corner. Place a pin, and then we're going to move to the opposite side and do the same thing. It's very important to get these precise because if they're not precise, then the bag bottom will not line up. Continue to repeat this step for the main fabric and the bottom secondary and the bottom main fabric. Once you have all the right sides together, we're going to stitch each corner at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And essentially, this will turn a flat pocket into a pocket with a little bit of depth. And if for some reason they don't look right, you can always de-thread and re-stitch. Each one of those corners should pop out the same distance. But moving on, slide the assembly to the side and grab your front top panel and your remaining front pocket bottom lining panel. And what we're going to do is place these on the top edge of our pocket assembly, starting with the front top pocket main panel. Place the right side together, lining it up directly in the center. Locate the top edge on the bottom lining panel, and we're going to place it on the opposite side with right sides together. Flip the assembly over to the secondary fabric side, and we're going to place the remaining front top panel directly on top with right sides together. It may look a little confusing, but we have 3 layers lined up with that top edge. Make sure they're directly in the center of that pocket assembly, and then we're going to stitch that top edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. After stitching, double check, make sure everything is still centered, and then we're going to flip the wrong sides together for the front top panels. Try to pull them away as best as you can from the bottom lining panel. Place a pin to keep the layers lined up and add a top stitch along that top edge. And just like that, our front pocket assembly is complete. So now we have all our assemblies ready to go, and we can start bringing them together. Slide this panel to the side and grab the side panel assembly. Mark both centers on the zipper side and the bottom panel side. Do the same thing for the front panel assembly. Place the side panel assembly around the outside edge of the front panel assembly using the centers as a guide. And make sure you have the zipper opening of the side panel at the top of the front panel assembly. Add a ton of pins, and then we're going to stitch all the way around that outside edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. This stitch can be fairly tricky, so take your time, and if you need to, you can always de-thread and try it again. Before moving on, I always like to pop the right sides out to make sure all those layers got stitched together. If everything is looking good, we can flip the wrong sides back out, grab the back assembly, and do the same thing. Mark the centers at the top and bottom. Place the right side together using those center markings to help line up the side assembly with the back assembly. Add a ton of pins, and then we're going to stitch all the way around the outside edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Can be pretty tricky, so take your time as you're sewing. With the hard parts out of the way, we're going to flip the right sides out, double check all the layers, make sure everything got stitched together. It's also a good time to check the stitch arc at the top. If it's not perfectly arched, you can go back and re-stitch. If everything is looking good, we're going to flip the wrong sides back out and clean up the outside edges. Because we're going to be adding bias tape to clean up those raw edges, so we don't want anything sticking out past the seam allowance. But anyways, I'm going to walk you through a few different techniques on how to add the bias tape, whether you're a pro or beginner. The first method is using a bias tape making kit. In this technique, you make your own double-sided bias tape to the size and fabric you want to use. All you do is cut your strips, feed it through your folder, and press it when it comes out the folder. It's very easy to do, and you get to customize the bias tape to your exact measurements. The second technique is using a double fold bias tape binder. This is the most efficient technique. You cut your strips, feed it through your binder, and sew it directly to your raw edge. And the last technique is using pre-made double fold bias tape. You are limited to colors, but it's very easy to use. You fold it over the edge and stitch it down. And you want to make sure you apply it all the way around the outside edge. And I'm using the bias tape attachment. This is a great way to go if you plan on making a lot of bags. It speeds up the entire process and makes for a perfect finished end product. I also noticed when you flip the right sides out, the edges are a little bit more secure because you have the bulkiness of that bias tape pushing towards the outside, giving you a better edge. But this step is optional. If you don't want to add it, you don't need to. And for the final step, we added custom branding. I used leather strips applied with double-sided rivets. I also did the same thing for the zipper pulls. And feel free to comment down below if you have any custom branding techniques that you want to share with people. You can also change up the dimensions of this bag, so if it is too small, you can make it wider, you can make it taller, and it really just comes down to adjusting those panels to match your measurements. Keep in mind, if you do make adjustments, you'll want to match the side panels with the front and back panels to make the circumference line up. Also, this bag can be made out of a ton of different materials, so test them out, comment down below, and let people know how they worked.
And there you have it, your mini backpack is complete. And hopefully your project went as smooth as mine. Sometimes when you're working with upholstery fabric like I was doing, it can get a little bit tricky to sew those side panels on because they start fraying very quickly. But as long as you keep up the pace and you just de-thread and retry again, you can make it perfect. Like always, I want to see what you come up with, so tag me on Instagram at Properfit Clothing. And until then, I'm going to keep the videos coming at you, so I'll see you next time.